Hello and welcome to part 3, decentralizing our blockchain. So, congratulations first for passing part 1 and part 2. We did a lot and we have a few things to do left that is of course related to decentralizing our blockchain, our cryptocurrency. So, we have actually 2 more requests to make. A first one to connect any new node you'd like in our decentralized network, and a second one to replace the chain in any node that is not up to date on the blockchain. That is, that doesn't contain the last version of the blockchain right after a new block was mined on another one. So we'll make these last 2 requests and then I guess we'll be ready to go for the demo. So there we go. I prepared a new code section here. The first one connecting new node, and that will be a new post request. Why post and not get? Well, that's of course because we're gonna basically create a new node in the decentralized network, and therefore we're going to register it. And to register it, you'll see in the demo, we'll have this separate JSON file which will contain all the nodes we want to have in our blockchain, including the new one we want to connect. And this JSON file will be exactly what we will post in Postman to make our post request. So to sum up, whenever we want to connect a new node to the blockchain, well, what we simply need to do is add this new node in the JSON file that contains already the existing node, the previous node, and we'll post this JSON file using this connect node post request. And that will be enough to connect this new node to our network. So let's do this. It's going to be a post request, and therefore I'm going to copy this and paste it right here. And now we just need to replace actually only the name of the request, which we're going to call connect node. And we don't need to change the method because, as we said, this is a post request. Great. Now let's define a new function that we're going to call again connect node, not taking any argument, because the only thing we need are the variables from our blockchain, which are already included in our blockchain object. So colon, and let's start implementing this function. So first step, exactly as we did for the add transaction method, we're going to get the request of posting a new node in the network through the getJSON function, which will return this JSON file that, as we said, will contain all the nodes of our decentralized network, including the one we are now connecting. So I'm simply going to copy this because it's exactly the same. We can override the JSON variable because these 2 functions are going to be used separately. So JSON equals request.getJSON. And now what do we have to do? What is the second step? Well, let's see what we have to do. We have to connect a new node to all the other nodes in the network. And to do that, we'll simply use our add node method that we made in part 1 to add all the nodes of the JSON file to our blockchain network. But if you remember, this add node method takes as argument an address, and therefore we need to get that address first, because right now our nodes are into a JSON file, and therefore we cannot use this variable directly into our add node method. So right now, the next step that we have to do is to get these addresses. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to use a method from our JSON object, which is the get method, because what we'll input in this get method is exactly the key of which the value is the address of the node. And you will see in our JSON file the way we register a new node is by only inputting one key, which we'll call the node key, and the value of this key will be exactly the address of the node. And in fact, I can show you exactly what will be in this JSON file by showing you an example of a JSON file that we'll post in Postman. So the JSON file will exactly look like this: JSON equals, then some brackets, and then just below, I just press tab here, we will only need to enter one key, our node, and we're going to enter these addresses in a list containing several addresses. So for example, I'm taking this one, that's to register node 5000, or if you want, we can start at, for example, 5001, and we have to put this in quote, but then we can connect some other nodes, like let's say node 5002, and then I don't know, if you want to exchange some AdCoins with 3 friends, well, you can add even another node, and you can take a node on port 5003. All right, and then you need, of course, to close the bracket, and that's exactly the JSON file we'll be posting in Postman, containing only one key, the node key, which, and make sure to understand this, will contain the addresses of all the nodes that are in the blockchain network. And whenever you want to add a new node to our blockchain network, well, you will first add the address of this node in this JSON file and then you will send the request to connect the nodes. All right, so you visualize this better now, and now if you want I can just press enter, but that was just for the example. So now what we'll do is, well, first update this from node to nodes, because indeed we can register several nodes at a time. This is exactly the key, and all this JSON.getNodes will get us exactly the value of this key, that is, the addresses contained in this list. But this get method here actually returns these values, and therefore I'm going to introduce a new variable here, which I'm going to call node, and that will exactly be this list of the addresses of the nodes you want to connect. All right, so nodes here represent our nodes, but it contains exactly the addresses of these nodes. All right, and now the next step is to do a quick check. We must always do a quick check when working with requests in case the request you make is invalid, that is, contains an issue. And here, the thing that we'll need to check is to make sure that the nodes here is not an empty list. That is, if we indeed have some node to register, because if we make a request to register one node, but we have nothing to declare, well, there is no point. So we'll just run this quick check. And to run this, we'll just check indeed that nodes is none. And if that's the case, we'll return an error. So we'll return first a message saying simply, well, no node. And then we will, of course, return an HTTP status code. And we're going to use the same as the one we used in add transaction, that is the 401, meaning that there is an issue when you post something. So here I'm adding 400, and there we go. We have our HTTP status code, and our check is done. And so now, what is the next step? Well, what we simply need to do is loop over our nodes, that is, loop over the addresses of our nodes, and simply add them one by one. All right, so we're going to make a for loop, of course. We're going to iterate on each of these nodes. And so here I'm starting with 4. Then, as we said, we're going to loop over the node in our nodes. So for each node in the nodes we want to add, well, what do? And that is where our add node method comes into play. That's when we're going to use it, because what we simply need to do now is to take our blockchain object and then use this method add node, which takes as argument, remember, the address of the node which we got in this nodes list here. But since we're iterating on each node's address of this list, well, this is exactly the address expected by the add node method. So here we simply need to input node. All right, and that will add our node. And so now eventually, first we can get out of the for loop because we're done. And now we have one final thing to do, which is to return the response. And we're going to do exactly as we did before. We're going to get separately the response first and then return it using the JSONify function and the HTTP status code. All right, let's do this. Let's get our response first. So response equals, and in this response, we will include two keys. First, the message, as usual, and then the second key, the total nodes in our blockchain. You know, because when, for example, we are adding one new node in the JSON file, well, when we connect this new node, it would be nice to have the list of all the nodes displayed in Postman. And therefore, you'll see, in this message, we'll display something like all the nodes are now connected, and then we can say the AppCoin blockchain now contains the following nodes. All right, and so as you can see, I added the colon here because what will follow this message is exactly this whole list of the nodes in our blockchain. And this whole list is, of course, the list. So list here is a function, the list of our blockchain nodes. You know, our blockchain here is the object, and the node is a variable of this object, a variable that we initialized in the init method right here, the set of nodes. All right, so that returns the list of all our nodes. And now, final step, we just need to return the response in the JSON format, and also the same code for success in a post request that we already used here, that is 201. So I'm just copying this and pasting it here. All right, perfect. So congratulations, our connect node request is now done. We are ready to move to the very final request we have to make for this implementation, and that is the replace chain request to apply the consensus in case one chain in the decentralized network is not up to date, and which basically will happen anytime a new block is mined on one specific node.